Hello everyone. Although I mentioned in the last video that the video coming up this week may well feature more East German kit, I decided to sort of stick away from that for the minute. We'll get back to East German kit in a bit. We'll stick with the Vietnam War sort of theme that was started by the previous video looking at tropical combat boots. What we're having a look at here is another element of US Vietnam War, another part of my US Vietnam War collection, piece of ephemera in this case, and that is an R&R information guide to Sydney, which was of course one of the R&R locations which a GI could be expected to be sent to or would be able to take R&R during their tour in Vietnam. And there were various different locations. Thailand was a very famous one, of course, and Sydney in Australia was another example. Sydney was one of those which required a longer R&R period of 7 days rather than 5. I think the other one was Hawaii. Most R&R stints were 5 days. Sydney and Hawaii were 7. So quite interested to pick this up when I found it. I'm presuming there are others of these for different R&R locations, and I'd be very interested to pick those up as well, or some examples of them anyway. But in this video, we're going to have a flick through this and see what sort of information was provided to the US soldier going on R&R to Sydney. And as I say, presumably there were other information packs for the different R&R locations, and they would presumably, again, contain information on available hotels, recreation, that sort of thing. So we're going to have a flick through this now and have a look what sort of information was provided ahead of time. So here we have it, the front cover, R&R Information Australia, and you can see a rather stunning photograph of Sydney here, I believe. Sydney being the main sort of hub of R&R in Australia for US personnel. The back cover here has another superb photograph you can see here. An enticing photograph for US servicemen looking to go on R&R. And you start off here, there's an interesting section at the top here, which is be sure to bring this book to the briefing. Do not detach insert until briefing. So I presume there was originally an insert within this, presumably dealing with the choices of the GI in question, and presumably you would fill that in with your preferences, and that would inform how you spent your R&R. That's what I'm guessing. As I say, the insert doesn't appear in this, so I don't know. That's purely speculation on my part. So you can see the contents here: general information, laws, customs, taxis, telephone, medical, dental services. Important things to consider when essentially going on holiday, as it were. It's the same thing that civilians would be concerned with if they were going on a break somewhere. Australian American Association on page 5, I've got a section in this. Accommodation, very important of course. Map of Sydney. Banking currency, which gives you rates of exchange and details regarding travellers checks. Pro Senior Recreation Travel Services, and that's an interesting page to look at. Gives you an idea of some of the sort of recreation activities which were available. Clothing, J&J Clothing, Clothing Hire Company, and we'll see that as well. It gives you an idea of some of the services that were available in terms of being able to hire suits and so forth, and very limited in terms of civilian items that would be brought with you to Vietnam, and that you'd then be able to take on with you to R&R, so you can actually hire civilian clothing if required for a stint in Australia. So the general information page here, again, the beauty of this is you can pause and read in full if you wish to. But this gives you a welcome to Sydney, the oldest and largest city in Australia, and gives you some ideas of the history of Sydney and the current situation in Sydney. Laws and customs, of course, very important. You're a guest of the government of Australia, and therefore it's important to abide by the local laws and so forth. Tipping. Obviously, tipping culture varies from country to country, and therefore it's important to have information provided on that. Taxis, details of how taxis operate, of course, again, very important for getting about and understanding what to expect in terms of using taxis. Financial assistance, only emergency dispersing facilities are available. Emergency pay is limited to the situation where the serviceman would be able to receive payments at his home unit. So something to note there, very specific, of course, to a serviceman on R&R rather than a general visitor to Australia. Motor vehicles, personnel on R&R are not allowed to drive any motor vehicle, including motorcycles and scooters, regardless of the type of driver's license you possess. So again, very different from someone visiting in a civilian capacity. Personnel on R&R are required to wear civilian clothing during their stay. If you arrive without civilian clothing, we strongly suggest you either rent or buy clothing from the clothier available in the briefing centre. So again, that will be covered further on in the guide. And then you have the Australian American Association, the Hospitality Committee of the Australian American Association, operates an information service adjacent to the R&R office. Again, very useful. So mentioned here. Telephone calls to the United States. I'm sure that's something that many GIs would want to avail themselves of and call back to family and so forth. And then you have the time differences, which is very useful when considering that and making a call. Obviously, huge time differences here to make note of, given the distance across the Pacific Ocean. So you have a section here on the Australian American Association. So again, I won't go over this in a huge detail. It is interesting here that there's a mention of Australian forces in Vietnam. This is basically detailing sort of Australian American cooperation, and obviously sort of promotes the Australian American Association. So, and another nice photograph in here as well. Very nicely produced guide, this, I have to say. The photographs used and the layout and so on is very much of its time. If you look at other print media of the period, it compares well to sort of print media magazines and popular magazines and so forth of the time. We then have the R&R Hospitality Service here, which gives you some information there on the service available. And then you have various areas of accommodation, various hotels and so forth. So take one, for example, the Wentworth downtown, and you have the telephone number for it there. Tariff, $11.50, room only. Twin, $7.25 each. Air conditioned, TV, radio, music in room, restaurant, grill room, coffee shop, lounge, public and saloon bars, cocktail bar, room service, 24 hours a day, and laundry and dry cleaning services, daily service provided there. So one example there. This gives you a breakdown of the hotels which were available, and obviously there's a cost involved to that, but it gives you a breakdown of the sort of service you would be able to receive at each of these, and obviously there'll be some preferences there. And again, the location of them and so forth as well may be important depending on what you want to do and how you want to spend your R&R. Further details of that here, and again you can pause and have a look at these in detail if you would like to. And then to assist in terms of sort of orienting yourself, there is a map of Sydney and its environs here, as you can see. So Port Jackson here, Sydney marked over here, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, quite useful, obviously a fairly large scale map of Sydney there. Currency and banking, very important again, gives you the exchange rates, and quite usefully what you can see a US $1 and 12 cents, and just a little bit over 12 cents is equivalent to $1 Australian, and then it gives you some useful conversions here of typical figures. So you can see here, $1 US is 89 Australian cents, US $5 is Australian $4.46. Quite different from the exchange rate these days, of course. So you can see that there, quite useful. And this gives you some information on, obviously, traveller's checks and how to get those, and obviously hours of operation and so forth, which is, again, important for visiting a foreign country, not only for those going on R&R, but obviously civilian travellers as well. That's another example there where it's something you'd just be considering in terms of going on a break if you were in civilian life. So we have here Pro Senior Recreation, and this is basically a travel company which offers various different pastimes and various different areas of recreation which you could indulge in Australia during R&R. So you can see examples of these here. So big game and deep sea fishing may be of interest to some. Horse riding, again, may be of interest to some who rode horses in a civilian life before being drafted, for example. Well, you're going on R&R, you can go horse riding and get a taste of that again. Sailing, night clubbing, I'm sure very popular. Camera tour of Sydney, again, may be of interest to some. Water skiing, again, I imagine water sports were quite popular. Water skiing and surfing and so forth, I can imagine being quite popular. Outback ranch visit is particularly of interest to me when I was reading through this. A visit to a country ranch and living with an Australian family can be arranged for you. You will actually live in the homestead with an Australian family, and depending upon your personal preference, you can either make a contribution towards the cost of your stay it'll be accommodated at no cost. So that was one that sort of stood out for me as being a little bit different Not sure how many would have taken that up, but give you sort of a taste of home life, which would be, for some, perhaps something they were really, would really benefit from. But I don't know. I love this photograph here, which I think is a mini Moki, if I'm correct, driving through the sort of the edge of the surf there on a beach. Again, great photographs used in this. And then we get on to the section here detailing J&J menswear, and you could J&J Clothing welcome you to Sydney and extend an invitation to view our range of fashionable menswear. And you can see here there are lease plans, buy and save, and a laundry service as well. So if you had civilian clothing available, you could have it laundered, if not availing yourself of sort of hotel facilities, and the various plans there for leasing suits and so forth if required, and various plans for doing so. And then obviously buy and save, listed below are samples from our store. Every garment is guaranteed and may be returned. Should any fault be detected, your money will be refunded without question. Suits and various other things mentioned here, obviously shoes and socks, sportswear, etc. So just interesting to note that if civilian clothing were required, there was an option for that as well, and it's all laid out in the information pack here for R&R in Sydney, in Australia. So as I say, I presume the insert was in the centre and has been pulled out. I've not actually looked particularly close for evidence of that, other the staples are a little loose, so it suggests there was perhaps another page in here that was pulled out. And as I say, I'm guessing that insert mentioned at the start here, you would have put information in there that you wanted to regarding where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do. But that's pure speculation, as I said at the start. If anyone has further information, can remember receiving one of these and using it, whether it were for Australia or another R&R centre, I'd be interested to know. And as I say, hopefully, if there were others of these, which I presume there were, then it would be interesting to find them and pick up other examples of these. One thing I forgot to mention at the start here, this is of course dated spring-summer 1968, and then you can see it's volume 1, number 1. So I presume these were a sort of mid-late war addition to sort of the information provided for those going on R&R in Vietnam. So from Vietnam rather. So there it is, an R&R information Australia, a little guide to going on R&R in Sydney. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. It is quite a niche piece of ephemera, but nevertheless, I do hope it has been interesting. I think it's an interesting piece of the story of the US soldier in Vietnam. Obviously, for a lot of men, R&R, their period of R&R was a major focus of sort of getting through the initial months in Vietnam. R&R would give you a break and then you'd go back and do the rest of your stint. Obviously particularly important for many draftees who perhaps didn't want to be there. So I think from that point of view it's an interesting piece of the story of the sort of US soldier in Vietnam. Very happy to have it in the collection. As I say, if I can find more of these for the different R&R locations, again I'm presuming they were produced, I'd be very interested to pick them up and perhaps talk through them in other videos going forward. So if you'd like to see more of that sort of thing, I say if I do pick them up, there's certainly more content looking at US Vietnam War kit, ephemera and so forth, and all the other topics I cover on the channel. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below, and that will of course alert you when I upload future videos. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.